civic students, it's Mrs. Kinder. I'm going to be teaching you guys all about systems of government. Now, systems of government is a little different than what we just covered, which was forms of government, where we learned about autocracies and monarchies, democracies, dictatorships, right? We learned about different forms of government in the last lesson. Now we're going to be looking at more of how is power distributed in these four systems of government that I'm going to show you. And these systems can be used alongside the forms of government that we just learned about last time. So Ms. Kinder is going to be teaching you guys how to define and compare parliamentary government, federal government, confederal, and unitary systems of government. So we used to have in America, we used to live under a confederation or have a confederal system of government. And now we live under a federal system. So that'll be kind of interesting to learn about how we used to have one type and now we have another, and what that looks like in our lives here today. But we'll also look at countries who have parliamentary systems of gov and also unitary systems of government. The reading looks similar to what I have on my screen right here. And as I read this entire assignment to you, you're going to notice some highlighted portions on my screen. You guys should use those highlighted portions to highlight it on your notebook page as well. Remember to use the highlighting tool that you have available to you in the tools toolbar at the top. You will also take notes on each form of government. And I would highly suggest you use the notes that I tell you to highlight as the sections that's going to be kind of what you take as your notes. So we are going to be looking at these little diagrams throughout the reading as well. Now, these diagrams are very important. They're wonderful visuals in order to understand these types of governments. And to be honest, even Ms. Kinder uses these visuals to remember how power is distributed, because I look at the size of the circles and I look at which way the arrows are pointing. And that's really important as we go through this lesson. It has massively helped me. I probably taught this subject maybe 3 years before I developed or found these little diagrams with the circles and the arrows. And I struggled with systems of government until I finally found this visual. And honestly, guys, it has completely changed my understanding of systems of government since I found these little images. And I want you guys to realize that it might help you just as drastically as it helped me, because I'm a visual learner and I needed something to visualize and to be able to understand these systems of government. So please, as I go through these images, I hope that you guys will listen and grasp onto these visuals to help you as well. So we're going to look at the different diagrams throughout the reading, but let me give you a little heads up of what they represent. Now, the circles represent the size or the amount of power. See how it says right here? It says the circles represent amount of power. The larger the circle, the more power it has. So if it's a really small circle, like this one is right here, this little yellow one, that means they don't have very much power. They got a little bit of power. Compare that to the big blue circle, and that's a big circle, which means these outside pieces have way more power than this little one in the middle, okay? And that's one way I remember about how if the states have the big circle, that means they have all the power, and that must be confederal because the states have all the power. And so I remember it by looking at the size of the circles, who has more power. And then if you watch the arrows, look at the direction that the arrows are pointing. The arrows represent the direction that the power is being distributed. Where the arrow is coming from is who holds that power. So in this one, if you look at the size of this circle is giant, and these little blue circles, little tiny blue circles, those are meaning that they have a little bit of power, and this center has all of the power. And it looks, if you see, the power is showing these people have it, and then sometimes they give a little power to the states, little power to the states. If you notice this one, they share back and forth, equal sized circles, so about equal power, and then they share power back and forth, back and forth. So this is important as we go through the lesson. Okay, the directions for my online kiddos. It says, as you read, highlight or mark sentences or phrases that help define the following terms: federal system, unitary system, parliamentary system, and confederal system, and highlight examples. Let's go to the next slide and I'll start reading. Effective government in any form requires a method for distributing authority or power within the country. The following passage explains the four main systems of government used around the world. You must be able to identify each system of government and explain the differences between them. So this first one is federal systems. Large and diverse countries often have a federal system of government where power is layered or shared among different levels. There is a central government, also known as the national government, and then there's the state governments, and each exercise their own powers. These states have independent authority over their area. The United States government is an example of a federal system. In the United States, there is a central government. Here's the central government, with an executive branch, the legislative branch, and a judicial branch. The head of the executive branch is known as the president. So before I go too far, let's go ahead and highlight some of these important facts. Here's the definition of a federal system of government. It's where power is layered or shared among different levels. The central government and the state governments each exercise their own powers. So if you look again at the picture here of federal government, the size of the circles is about the same, which means states, like each of the 50 different states here, they each have their own equal power in comparison to the central government. Again, about the same size, so the power is about equal. And you'll notice the arrows. So the central government can give power, they distribute power to the states, but then the states can distribute some power back to the central government. So there's like this balancing system where they share power back and forth. I'm going to show you a video to help you understand this a little more too, okay? Hang in there with me, okay? Let's read this next paragraph, and I love this picture, and we're going to talk about it in just a second. Let me read you the paragraph first. There are also state governments with executive, legislative, and judicial branches. So even at the central government, they have a legislative, executive, and judicial, and the states have a legislative, executive, and judicial. The head of the executive branch of a state government is called the governor. The state legislatures pass laws having to do with their state affairs, and the state executive carries them out, and the state's judicial branches interpret them. Federal systems also include independent local governments, such as counties and city governments. The citizens elect many of the public officials in counties and cities. The national government does not have the right to eliminate or abolish these states or local governments. Okay, so let me break that down. Let me look at this picture for you first, okay? So this picture shows you the layering of the different levels of government. At the very tip top, we've got one central or one national or federal government, right? That's the one up in Washington, D.C. So if we are in Florida, we can take our little mouse here. I'm going to go all the way up. And here, right above where it says Virginia, this little teeny area right here is called Washington, D.C. Okay, it's kind of between Maryland and Virginia. It's this little federal enclave, little piece of property right there. That's our national capital. That's where our federal government is housed. Then we have 50 state governments, right? So each one of these little states is a state government. They each have their own type of government as well. And so that's the next layer. And then we have our county. If you guys are from the area and you know what county we live in, it's Marion County. So Marion County, and then within Marion County, there's all these little cities, right? We got Bellevue as a city, Ocala as a city, and those are our little local governments, right? So this could all be, you could call this all local governments. Counties are still technically local, and that's just the bottom layer of our pyramid. And there's way more counties and local governments than there are states and federal, right? So it breaks down the different levels of our government. So this is our federal system. This should be familiar to you guys, at least in the idea of you've heard of, oh, we have a federal government or we have state governments. Those terms should be familiar to you. So that's because we have that here in America. So I've highlighted some key facts. It will definitely show up either on a test or on a quiz or in an activity page. So make sure you guys are highlighting the facts that I gave you. The U.S. is an example. Remember, I told you have to have examples of each system of gov. Here's another fact about how the national government just can't go, you know what, let's just get rid of Florida. No more Florida. They can't just get rid of us, okay? And the federal government can't say we're getting rid of Bellevue. That would be a state decision because the state would be in control of our local governments. So we're going to move on, and I've got a great video clip I'm going to insert here for you guys on Facts of Congress. It's just a quick little 1-minute video on federalism.
And now, another fact of Congress. Our government is like a big 3-layer cake. We have local government, state government, and national government, often called federal government. Local government handles local issues like police, water, and building permits. State government handles issues about your state, such as education, healthcare, and recreation. Federal government handles national issues, such as national parks, the military, and space exploration. This system of dividing responsibilities among governments is called federalism. Sometimes who does what isn't that clear, yet this flexibility lets us decide whether a particular problem is best handled in local town halls, in state capitals, or by the men and women in the Congress. This fact of Congress is adjourned.
So based on what we have highlighted in the previous paragraphs, I want you guys to type out 2 facts that describe or define federalism, or the federal system of government. So type your facts right here and right here. I gave you 3 things to highlight. Now, 2 of those were facts, and 1 of them was an example of a country that has this type of government. So make sure you're typing out the country that I said 4 or 5 times has this type of government. We live in it. What is the name of our country? Put that right here. Type it out. We're going to watch a video on federalism from Schmoop. And Schmoop is a great little YouTube channel that likes to make videos for kids on all kinds of topics. If you're ever struggling in any topic, they have fun videos for kids.
We speak student.
Federalism, a la Schmoop. Anytime you and your sibling have gotten into it with each other, your parents have likely stepped into the ring to separate the 2 of you and to get you both to play nice.
Aww.
Well, back when our country was even younger than you and your sibling, it got into some similar squabbles. What we as a nation decided to do, mainly as a result of the failure of the Articles of Confederation, was to engage in a political system known as federalism. Basically, control was to be split between both national and state governments. In other words, they both got to play with the new Xbox.
Woohoo!
Isn't that cool? There wasn't a strong centralized government in place before the Constitution was written and ratified. It was just a bunch of separate states, each minding their own business and setting their own rules. So this idea of all the states being minions, more or less, underneath the bigger umbrella of one national government freaked some people out a bit. But the whole Articles of Confederation experiment had gone awry. It was clear that the states needed a little hand-holding. Some people were able to recognize the positives, however. The 10th Amendment gave whatever powers that weren't in the federal government's control to the states. So it wasn't like Big Brother was stepping in to rule over all with an iron fist. They were just trying to divvy things up a little more fairly.
Would you like white or dark meat?
It also provided a nice little compromise. No crazy King George III types would be in charge,
You say that like it's a bad thing.
but there would be no wussy, powerless government like there was under the Articles of Confederation either.
Who you call a wuss?
So in order to outline an argument for the ratification of the Constitution and for a strong central government, a few of our founding fathers, namely James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton, created the Federalist Papers. Yeah, those. The papers were published serially over the course of about a year, so American citizens were introduced gradually rather than all at once to the ideas of these 3 great thinkers. And you thought it was tough waiting each week for a new Breaking Bad episode. But while they swayed many minds, there were still plenty of staunch anti-federalists, most of whom were in favor of a weaker federal government. They had done the whole maniacal tyrant thing already and were worried the door was being left open for such a thing to happen again. However, most of them eventually caved and went along with the majority, under the condition that there will be added to the Constitution a Bill of Rights.
I'm just a bill protecting freedom and rights.
This was back in the days when opposing members of the government could actually agree on some things, not like today. All the states eventually ratified the Constitution, and the federal government and the states lived happily ever after. Or did they?
All right, so let's move on to unitary. A unitary system. All right, In countries with similar population and with a common tradition, language, and a sense of national history, the central governments may be unitary. With a unitary system, government power is held at the center, and the central or the national government performs all of the governmental functions. If you guys look at this, but look at the big yellow circle. That should show you, look at the title, it says central government. The size of the circle is showing how much more power they have. So if this yellow portion is bigger, the yellow circle is bigger, it means it has way more power than the state governments, okay? So this is not like the federal. Federal was showing equal size circles and the arrows went back and forth. This one shows big giant yellow circle in the middle, meaning the central government has all the power and they distribute a little bit of power to the states. All right, let's look at this next next paragraph. Paragraph 2. Local governments within this system manage issues within their area, but then the national government determines their power. These local governments can only exercise powers that are delegated or given to them by their central government. So again, the central government gives power, delegates power, distributes power to the states, and they can decide what kind of power that's going to be. The central government has the power to abolish or eliminate these local units at any time. Now, that's different than federal. Remember, the central government couldn't delete Bellevue, right? They can't just go, let's get rid of Florida, or let's get rid of Bellevue, Florida, right? The national government or central government couldn't do that in a federal system, but they can do that in a unitary system. This kind of government is known as unitary because the whole government of the nation exists as a single unit. The national government has the ability to tax and make all major laws that are followed throughout the country. Examples of countries that have unitary systems of government are France, the United Kingdom, Greece, Portugal, and Spain. Now, I want to be clear. This says the United Kingdom, not Great Britain, not England. Okay, United Kingdom as in all of the different parts of the United Kingdom. And I believe that's covered in this video that I'm going to show you. So most governments around the world are unitary. Although power is centralized with the national government holding most of the authority, a dictator doesn't necessarily run them. They can be both unitary and democratic, meaning the citizens can hold the power and they can vote, or they could be unitary and be run by a dictator. So let's see if there's some more things I need to highlight, right? Examples of countries. We got France, United Kingdom, Greece, Portugal, and Spain, unitary types of governments. And that key point that I said it was different about this compared to federal system, about how they can indeed delete little local units of government. Okay. Oh, let me go back really quick. So again, the size of the circles on this one were small. The power is distributed from the central government. Make sure you guys memorize these circles, and I would even draw them out on notebook paper for yourselves over and over again. I'm going to show you a quick video also on unitary government.
One of the most important questions a new society, government, or nation must ask itself is, how will we divide power and responsibility? Federalism, or the relationship between a central, often national government, and its political subunits, often states, counties, and provinces, etc., can exist in many different forms. In a unitary government, this relationship is largely one-sided, with the central government enjoying almost complete control over their smaller, local government entities. In a unitary system, almost all power and responsibility is vested in the central government. Local governments may only exercise power through the central government. This map shows the nations using a unitary system as of 2009, highlighted in dark blue. In the modern world, many nations utilize a unitary system of government. For example, in the United Kingdom, supreme political power is held by the Parliament, the legislature of the nation that is located in Great Britain. The other parts of the nation, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, each have their own local governments. However, they cannot make laws that affect the other parts of the nation or refuse to enforce laws made by the Parliament. This chart shows the government structure of the United Kingdom. Another place we can observe unitary power is in the state governments of the United States of America. While the United States as a whole utilizes a federal system in which power is shared between the states and the national government, the 50 states individually function as a unitary system. Through their state legislature and governor, each state makes laws that affect their citizens. County and city governments in each state may make local laws, but are required to enforce and abide by the rules of their state. As with any government system, there are advantages and disadvantages in a unitary system. One major advantage of a unitary system is that the responsibilities and powers of government tend to be fairly clear-cut. In times of crisis, a clear division of power often results in more swift reactions and assistance than in a form of government where power is divided between multiple government entities. In a unitary system, laws tend to pass more quickly because they only need to be approved by the central authority. In addition, since only the central authority may make laws, there is very little chance that national and state laws, or in the case of the American states, state and local laws, will be contradictory.
Government. Now here's a memory hint. This is what I came up with. It works for me. To remember unitary government, remember that this system of government is based on a single unit, unitary unit. Visual learners may find it helpful to think of that circle in the middle as being one single unit that holds all the power. I always think of that one single giant circle in the middle. It's a single unit, unitary, and then they distribute a little bit of power to the states. Now, I'm going to give you, this is a comparison chart of comparing the systems of government between federal and unitary. So on this side, there's two levels of government. We've got our national government and our state governments. And technically, we even got little local governments too. Unitary government, it's just like one giant level, right? It's like the large unit in the center has all the power. But in federal, they both have power, the national and the state. Political power is shared in a federal system, but political power is held by the central government only in a unitary. We have two different types of laws in the United States because we live under a federal system. We've got our national laws that everyone in the whole country has to follow. And we have state laws, right? So Florida can make a law that's specific to just Florida and it doesn't apply to other states. And then the federal government can make a law that applies to all the states. Now, if you lived in a unitary country, there's only one set of laws. They're uniform laws across the whole country. So if they make a law, it would be passed for everybody. There are two sets of lawmaking branches at two different levels. So in the United States, right, we've got Congress up in Washington, D.C. that is at the national level, and they make laws for the whole government. And then each state has their own legislature. So every single state, all 50, have their own lawmaking branch. We call that a legislature. If you lived in a unitary country, a unitary government, there's only one legislature. There's only one type of lawmaking branch. The supreme lawmaking branch is only located in the national level of government. The last comparison here, if you lived in a federal government like what we do here in the United States, national judicial branch, like the U.S. Supreme Court, handles disputes and it resolves conflicts between the national government and the state. So our national court system handles conflicts between the different states. There is no national judicial branch to handle these types of disputes in a unitary government. So if like two states are fighting, it's not like they have this national thing that would handle two states fighting. Okay, oops, sorry, let me go back. So if you want to pause and highlight, political power is shared in a federal system, but political power is held by the central government only. For unitary, you can highlight those facts. I tell you now that they're super helpful when you're doing your activity quiz later. So based on what we highlighted, go ahead and type in those facts. I would pause the video here. I'd go back and I'd make sure I got my facts, type them down into your note-taking little graphic organizer that is within your notebook. Please go ahead and type those out here and put down the names of all those different countries. Type in the names of each country that you saw that had this type of government. This again is unitary, where the circle in the middle is one single giant unit with all the power. Okay. Parliamentary. Okay, we only got two more to go, guys. So parliamentary, this is a totally different looking picture, guys, and I will show you and explain the visual later. But this is very different than the other type that we had before, okay? So in a parliamentary system, the government power lies with the legislative body, and the leader of that country is part of the legislature. Parliamentary systems are democratic systems in which the leader is part of the legislature. So the leader is part of the lawmaking branch. The legislature is a fancy way of saying the people who make laws, okay? So there's a giant group of people that make laws in parliamentary systems of government, okay? They're called parliament in this right here. And the voters get to elect whoever they want voters, citizens, get to pick who they want to be in Parliament, the lawmaking branch. Okay, and then the Parliament will choose who's going to be the leader of the whole country. So instead of like in America, the voters pick for who we want to work in Congress, the lawmaking branch, and we get to vote for who we want to run the country, who like our president. But not in this kind of country. They call their leader a prime minister instead of a president, and the voters just vote for the lawmakers, and then the lawmakers choose a prime minister, which is their leader. Okay, and then that leader works with Parliament. They're all like in the same branch together. Citizens elect leaders indirectly through political parties. In these types of elections, citizens vote for the political party of their choice, and then the party chooses who will represent that party in government. In parliamentary systems, the percentage of the vote received by any party determines how much representation that party will have in the legislature. So, if a huge percentage of voters voted, say in our country, you guys are familiar with Democrats, right? So there's Democrats and Republicans. You probably have heard those two terms before. We'll study them later in the school year. But if the voters, say a majority of the voters chose Democrat to work in Parliament, then the Parliament would then get to pick, the Democrats in Parliament would get to pick the Prime Minister because the majority of them are there's a majority of Democrats in Parliament. So let's keep reading and hopefully it'll continue to make sense. In Israel, for example, any political party that earns at least 2% of the vote will earn at least one seat in Israel's national legislature called the Knesset. Maybe? I don't know how to pronounce it. In parliamentary systems, the prime minister is the head of the government. Some parliamentary systems elect the prime minister through an election by the legislature, while other parliamentary systems hold an election by the citizens. Okay, so the biggest things y'all need to know. Okay, there's two major things you need to know. You need to know that the leader of a parliamentary system is called prime minister. Number one, if you want to get an A on a test and it has to do with parliament, you need to know that prime minister is the leader. Okay, that's like the dead giveaway for sure. If you see prime minister, it's parliamentary. Prime minister, parliamentary. Okay, it's super, like, that's just memorize it. Okay, it's a fact you have to know. And then this fact up here about how the leader comes from Parliament and is chosen by Parliament, the lawmaking branch, that's the other like number one key fact that you would need to know about a parliamentary system of gov. We don't have this one here in the United States. Honestly, guys, the number one thing you'll be tested on if you are tested on parliamentary is that the prime minister or the leader of the country works with Parliament and that Parliament chooses the prime minister. And that you need to know that there's a prime minister if it's Parliament. There's no president, right? It's called a prime minister. All right, let's read the last little paragraph. Gives you your examples of the countries that have this. Let's go ahead and highlight them. The United Kingdom has a parliamentary system of government. During an election, voters elect members of the House of Commons, which is their lower house of parliament, and then these members choose the leader of a majority party in the House of Commons as their prime minister. So basically, whoever wins majority rule, right, so whoever gets the most amount of votes to be in parliament, that bigger party gets to pick the prime minister. The British prime minister will call for general elections at least once every 5 years. All the seats in Parliament are up for election at that time. Other countries with parliamentary systems include Canada, Germany, India, Ireland, Italy, Japan, and South Africa. Oops. So here are some more examples you guys could pick for countries. You're actually required to write, you should be writing all the different examples that I give you. So Canada, Germany, India, Ireland, Italy, Japan, and South Africa. All right, so make sure you guys are filling those out in your let me skip ahead really quick. We're going to be filling those out in here. So all the names of the countries that were listed that have this type of government, put them here. Okay? Okay. So England has this type of government. England does. I know it says the United Kingdom again. So I feel like that's a confusing portion. England itself has a parliamentary system of gov. Great Britain as a whole or the United Kingdom as a whole has a unitary system of government. Parliamentary would be like if you were in England and you saw this, there's a prime minister, a leader of the country, and he is picked by the parliament, and parliament is chosen by the voters. All right, so this little chart, it's something that shows similarities and differences between parliamentary and presidential systems. So the United States, we have a presidential system, and we're going to compare those two. So we have a president in our country, they have a prime minister, right? So let's look at how this works in the two different countries. Parliamentary system. The leader is called the prime minister. In America, we call ours the president. The legislature is called parliament. Ours is called Congress, the lawmaking branch. The prime minister is elected by parliament, not a vote from the people. In our country, in America, we have a presidential system here in our federal government. The citizens vote for the president separately from Congress. Executive and legislative branches are combined. So if you live in a have a parliamentary system of government, the executive, meaning the leader, and the legislative branch, the lawmaking branch, those two branches are together as one. They're one branch. We have separation of powers in the United States and under our presidential system. So separation of power between the executive and the legislative branches. And the last one, no fixed term for office of prime minister. In America, we do have fixed terms, meaning our president cannot work. They work for 4 years, and then there's a new election, and then they can work for 4 more years, and that's it if they got reelected. You cannot work for more than 8 years total. You can't be elected, for more than 8 years. We'll talk about some of those stipulations later in the school year. But in a parliamentary system, there's no fixed term limit. So they can hold an election. They can get reelected as often. There's no fixed terms. Here are some of the key facts that I highlighted for you guys that I would suggest using as key points as well. Okay, go ahead and write down your facts. Pause the video. Go back and listen to what you may have missed or misunderstood. Here we go. Last one, guys. This is Confederate system. Now, this is what we used to have in America back when we lived under the Articles of Confederation. There was only 13 states. We just broke up with Great Britain, and we're sitting here going, how do we start a government? How do we get our own? Because we used to live under the king's rules, and now we're going to be our own nation. So we created something called the Articles of Confederation, where each of the 13 states had their own power. And then they kind of gave a little bit of authority to like a central government, but not really. Okay, so let's look at how that all worked out. It didn't work out well for us because we got rid of it, but we'll learn all about that soon. So it's either a confederation or a confederal system of government. Independent states sometimes join together to create a type of central government known as a confederation. The central government only exists to provide specific services that are determined by the independent members. For example, they may cooperate over issues like trade or foreign policy, like going to war, or handling disputes or peace agreements with other nations. But that's it, right? Like they're only going to each state is going to rule themselves like their own little independent country. And then occasionally they're like, we should probably talk to each other and like work together with the central gov because we got a country that wants to go to war with us. So maybe we should work together to handle that. Or maybe they want to create an agreement, like a peace agreement with another nation. But that's it, right? Otherwise they're their own little independent countries kind of doing their own thing. But we're claiming we're all together. If you notice, by the way, the size of the circles, that's super important. Okay, so I'm going to read those here. The central government of a confederation is the weakest of all of the government systems. So the central government is teeny little tiny, right? Tiny little yellow circle. This is demonstrated by the image to the right. The central government circle is very small, showing that they lack power compared to the states, who have large circles representing large amounts of power. Look at the big blue circles compared to the little yellow circle. In addition, the arrows demonstrate that the power comes from the states, and they only give some minor power to the central government. So the states distribute power to the central gov, and they only give a little bit of power to the central government. States hold all the power. Member states in a confederation maintain their own individual power, and they delegate or give the central government only those powers that they think are essential for its maintenance. So basically, just enough power to keep it alive, and that's it. The individual states or countries making up the confederations have the power to tax and make their own laws. The central government serves as a coordinator to protect the interests of all of its members. It also represents the Confederation in matters with outside governments, but its actions are reviewed and approved by each member state. Each member of the Confederation is usually free to leave at any time. So basically, like if the state doesn't want to be in this little group anymore, they can just leave. Okay, they're free to leave. And then it's just these other 3 little states that are kind of working together under this like umbrella of this little miniature central government. The 13 newly independent American states joined to form a confederation in 1781 after the Revolutionary War. However, the type of government established by the Articles of Confederation proved to be too weak. By adopting the Constitution, Americans moved from a confederal to a federal system. So our Constitution changed it from what we used to have under this little document called the Articles of Confederation to what we have now, which is the Constitution. And now we have a federal system. Let's go ahead and highlight some of these facts before I read that last paragraph. So up here is the definition of a confederation. Again, pointing out that the central government has it's the weakest central government in a confederation. Understand that states have all the power. The states only give a little bit of power to the central government. You have to know for sure that America used to be a confederation. We used to have one, and now we have a federal system. And then here's the last little paragraph that tells you what countries may have a confederation or what organizations have a confederation. No modern nation is organized as a confederation. Yet, some international organizations, such as the United Nations and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is called NATO, function as confederations. Some also consider the European Union, which is the EU, today as another example of a confederal system. The European Union consists of member states that continue to have their own government. So like they have their own country, but then they're also part of this like club that has rules for all of them to follow.
For a brief 8-year period, the U.S. operated as a confederal government under the Articles of Confederation. The Continental Congress wrote the Articles of Confederation during the Revolutionary War as the first Constitution of the United States. The Articles were written to give the colonies some sense of a unified government. A convention called in May 1787 to rewrite the Articles decided to draft an entirely new constitution. The new Constitution, ratified in 1789, created a federal-style government with a strong central government. The European Union is another example of a confederate government. The European Union is made up of different nations that have come together under the same currency. They have a centralized structure, but the nations within the EU all have the power to leave.
All right, guys. So take 2 facts that you learned from this page, right? And you're typing them down here, and then you're writing in what kind of example country. So it says no modern country, but you still need to explain like, well, okay, so the European Union, NATO, and this one is important, United Nations. That's why I highlighted it, because there's a question on it. The United Nations is an example of a confederal system. All right, guys. So your worksheet that you're going to be doing, your activity page, it's going to be on a Microsoft form. So you're not going to be filling it out like this, but it looks similar to what this is. You're going to be answering all the questions in the Microsoft forms, and then it will automatically tell you what your grade is when you're finished with the assignment. Okay. There's also a Kahoot that I think we will play in class based on this topic, and that should help you guys to understand this material a little bit better as well. I think that's it. There is a video here at the end of this video, if you guys would like to watch this. It's 7 minutes. It's by a guy named Mr. Raymond. He is a teacher in Orlando, and he teaches this online because he has been teaching online for many, many years. And if you feel like you didn't understand anything Miss Kinder just read to you or said to you, watch his video because he's an amazing teacher. He does a great job of explaining stuff, and I added this video just to help you guys understand this stuff better as well, okay? So You can either pause the video here, go do your Microsoft Forms activity, or if you feel like you need more help, continue watching the video, and from here on out, watch Mr. Raymond's video clip, and then go do the Microsoft Forms after he gets done explaining it to you. All right, guys, have an awesome day, and please do your work, turn everything in on time, and good luck.
Secretary of Treasury.
Secretary of Treasury.
Deals with money.
Deals with money.
Secretary. Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Civics EOC Academy, where today we're going to begin looking outside of America with how different countries set up their governments. Last time we finished up federalism, the system of sharing powers between the central government and the state governments, and this will come up in our lesson today. Today we're going to look at different forms of government, such as direct democracy, representative democracy, socialism, communism, monarchy, oligarchy, and autocracy. You're also going to look at different systems of government. Note that systems and forms are two different things, and these include parliamentary, federal, confederal, and unitary. And just remind your teachers that this PowerPoint, lesson plans, and activities are all available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just search for Mr. Raymond's Civics EOC Academy. So what is the difference between a system of government and a type or form of government? Well, systems look at how power is shared between the various levels of government. Remember, your levels are national or central at the top, state or province in the middle, and local towns, cities, and villages at the bottom. So we looked at a federal system in the U.S., which shares power between the national and state governments. And this is what systems are about. They're about the different levels. Types of government are how the government operates, who in particular holds the power in the government, and the idea of how best to govern. For example, democracy is a form or type of government, while federal is a system of government. So we're going to start with systems of government. And on your state exam, you're very likely to see a chart like this. The arrows in these charts explain which direction power and interaction flows. And if you memorize the direction of power in these charts, you'll be able to answer your test questions. For a unitary government, the power is held by the national government alone, who tell the local governments what to do. So we see the arrows heading out from the central government. In a confederal system, the states have all the power, so you see the direction of power is coming from them. For a federal system, the national or central government share power with the states, so you see the arrows pointing back and forth. It's really that simple, but we'll look closer at these systems. Hopefully you remember the confederal system, in which the states hold all of the power. Again, here we see the arrows as the direction of power. This is where local or state governments establish a relationship to create a national government to deal with some limited issues. Now you have to remember that the central government is just another term for the national government. So the US government or the French government or the government of China, these are central governments. In a confederal system, the central government is very weak. So hopefully you remember that a confederation is the first system of government that the United States had under the Articles of Confederation. You can tell right by the name alone. The South during the Civil War also had a confederation. In fact, soldiers who fought for the South were called the Confederates. Remember, the reason that the original 13 colonies created a confederation under the Articles of Confederation was to fight the British. They didn't want to give up power to a national government. They just wanted to function as 13 independent states. So building an army to defend a country would be a reason regional states might want to create a confederation. Another reason to create this system would be to protect trade, which is what the European Union is today. The countries of Europe have created this weak central union to combine their economies. Very few countries today use choose confederal governments. One example would be Belgium, which has two states, Flanders in the north and French-speaking Wallonia region in the south. These two states keep their independence and power to rule, but are united under the Central Union of Belgium. The federal system is the one that we covered in our section on federalism. Again, this is the system which the national and the regional or state governments share power. So you'll see the arrows going both ways. In the United States federal system, you live under a U.S. government, but you also live under a state government, such as Florida or California or Texas. Each level has their own powers and responsibilities. Federal systems are good for large countries like the United States because you have a local government which is more in line with your section of the country, but a large country that can do big things like protect you and the environment as well as trade with other countries. A lot of large countries have federal systems, such as Argentina, which is divided into 23 provinces, Germany with 16 states, India, a country of over 1 million people, divided into 7 provinces, and then further into 29 states. So all of these countries have their local regional governments, but they also have national or central governments. In a federal system, the people elect their leaders on the various levels of government. Here is the executive for Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel, and she is like the president for the country. And the people who live in the state of Bavaria, Germany, have another executive, Horst Seehofer, who would be like the governor of a state. A unitary system works well for smaller countries, which don't need to divide into regions. In this system, the national or central has all of the power, and they direct the local governments like cities or towns on what to do. Here, the national government passes laws and runs education and the police for the entire country, but gives some power to local cities or towns to run the day-to-day operations of these programs. Countries who have unitary systems include Britain, France, and Italy. They have a national government that runs the whole country. And here's a typical state exam question for your systems. In a unitary system, the Constitution places all of the power in the central government. A parliamentary system isn't one of the traditional systems of government. This isn't about the different levels of government, but about the different branches of government. A parliamentary system is about how you choose the executive for a national government. Here is a comparison between the parliamentary system and what we have, which is a presidential system. In a presidential system, the voters elect the legislative branch, which in America we call Congress, and the voters elect the executive branch, which is headed by the president. In a parliamentary system, the voters elect members of the legislative branch, or parliament, and the parliament chooses the chief executive, often called the prime minister. Britain is the best known example of a parliamentary system. In this system, whichever party holds a majority of the seats, they choose one of its members to be the prime minister. So what are some advantages of this system? Well, since the prime minister is a member of the legislature, it's much easier for the executive to get laws passed that they are interested in, or to influence the lawmaking body to use, say, military force or pass treaties. However, some disadvantages would be that the people don't get to directly choose the executive, and there's less checks and balances between the two branches. Now, a parliamentary system is often described as having a weak executive, but there have been many influential prime ministers in British history, including the famous Winston Churchill, chosen by his Conservative Party to lead the country throughout World War II. So remember, unlike the big three systems of government, which describe sharing power between the levels of government, the parliamentary system is about choosing an executive for the country. And that's the end of part 1, Systems of Government. But up next, make sure you check out Forms of Government.